Welcome back to the MagellanRx Specialty Summit 2022, Connecting You. I'm so excited to connect you to our next featured speaker, and now my BFF, Matthew Zachary. Matthew is a 26-year brain cancer survivor and one of the most respected and influential and visionary voices in healthcare. He's an award-winning concert pianist and a film composer, and he is the podfather of healthcare broadcasting and host of the wildly successful podcast, Out of Patients with Matthew Zachary, a top 10 podcast in healthcare. And that's how we met. I had the pleasure of joining Matthew in his studio, just a little bit away here in New York City, and back in May, and we bonded over everything from 80s pop culture to the horrible journey of cancer to making sure that the patient experience is well understood in these important decisions that you all get to make. So I was about 6 months into getting my dream job working for MagellanRx. I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I was not 40 years old. I was 5 days away from 40. And in a full arc moment, I came up to New York City to party with my girlfriends on my 40th birthday 5 days later, and I had to tell them I had breast cancer. And then several months later, I got a chance to come to my very first MagellanRx Specialty Summit. And I got a chance to meet some of you all and hang out with my colleagues, and I had to tell them I had breast cancer. And look at us today. We've survived COVID, cancer, and we're here back in person at the Specialty Summit. And it's why Matthew founded the award-winning nonprofit Stupid Cancer and created the National Young Adult Cancer Movement to help improve the lives of millions of patients that are going through cancer in their 20s and 30s. He's currently the CEO and founder of Offscript Health, and it's the first broadcasting company focused solely on health and patient engagement. He's also an advisor to the stars. He sits on the advisory board for Google Health, Jasper Health, the Centers for Disease Control, and the National Cancer Institute. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me in welcoming my friend MKZ, Matthew Zachary.
Hey there. This thing on? Yes, you can hear me. Hello there. So my name is Matthew Zachary. This was me on, I think, day 7. Yeah, it's a long time ago. But I'm here to share with you not just my story, but so many insights. I've had like 8 concurrent careers. I'm privileged to not live an ordinary life. And, 26 years later, we don't know how I'm here, but I'm here. And it's really important to have voices like mine and my colleagues and my peers on stage at these events, not to remind you that we exist or that everyone's a patient, but to put perspective in what it's like to work in advertising and marketing in the healthcare sector, but happen to be a person that had healthcare land on them and never wanted to enter that store. So my story begins when I started playing piano. I was in 5th grade at a birthday party at this girl I liked, and she had a grand piano. And of course, all the kids were like flocking to her, and like, this could be a great way to get attention. So I got home one day in 6th grade, and my dad bought my mom a piano because she played as a kid. And I'm like, where do you put your fingers? I'm desperate to get attention. And my mom showed me, and instantly I just took to it. Got lessons from a Juilliard graduate, and went to university, Binghamton upstate, and became like this big fish in a small pond. I was writing for orchestra, jazz, string quartet. I was producing lots of musicals and like Broadway and things like that. I had my whole life set. Unusual at the age of 19 or 20 to know that. And I wanted to go to USC Film Schools, to tell you, with the late, great Jerry Goldsmith, who was John Williams' mentor, to put that in perspective. John Williams had a mentor. So that was where I was in 1995. But all of a sudden, my left hand stopped working. The fine motor coordination just was gone one day. And it was bizarre, because it's a very strange early symptom that you would never diagnose or notice unless you were a pianist. The fine motor of arpeggiating. So I couldn't write because I'm a lefty. Obviously, that was my laptop, actually, in 1995, because I'm a total nerd. I couldn't really type except with my right hand, and obviously I couldn't play. So in the spirit of misdiagnoses, in the hilarity and the comedy of terrors, I went to campus services numerous times, and they said, oh, put your backpack on that shoulder. Oh, you might have meningitis. Oh, great. Carpal tunnel syndrome, Epstein-Barr. No. Robitussin for brain cancer. That's my next book that I'm never writing. Until I had actual symptoms. They finally started to take me seriously. And then 1996 hit, I had an MRI, and that's not supposed to be there. That is called a medulloblastoma. It is a PNET, primary neuroendocrine tumor. You're born with it. It is a congenital brain tumor in your cerebellum. It's the only PNET in your cerebellum, which means that the surgery you had, which was this, basically, my memory of surgery, they have to rip your head open, go through your brainstem and get it out there and hope you live. They only told my parents maybe a week after surgery, oh, he had a 20% chance of living. Thanks for telling us after the fact. All sorts of fun stuff. This is my scar. We work in medicine. I have to show it to you. This is real life. This is my radiation treatment. For 33 days, I had 6,000 CG. Any millennials, just Google that. This is what I look like. But you look great. Meanwhile, I was a shell of a person, and I felt like I was dying. I had friends and family, but I didn't even know that there could be other people out there that were my age that had this. Of course, my plans to go to grad school were shot. Like the worst day of my life at that time with brain cancer was I'm not going to be a concert pianist anymore. My left hand kind of snapped back a little bit, but I hadn't used it the right way for so many months it had lost all of its muscle memory. I did graduate on time, again, but I look great. You know, bald has always been pretty hip. So, but you got a nice head too. Doesn't really help. But the point I want to make in my story is the one thing that matters most as a through thread to today is how I was treated by my medical professionals. And this is by no means casting a wide net with a big brush. I like to talk about the happened to have situation. We can get lucky if we happen to have somebody in our life, in our family, who's there to protect us. Because there's three things when you're diagnosed with cancer. Actually, there was two things back then. There was no Google. There's your doctor, and there's chaos, which is luck and hope at the same time. My dad's best friend is a doctor named Jay Tishfield. He's one of the world's leading global geneticists since the 1970s. 3 PhDs from Yale. He's crazy, but he knows his stuff. Radiation wraps up on August 30th. I'm a shell of a person. I lost all my hair. I was impotent. I was infertile. I lost 110 pounds, found it, but I move on. We get to Sloan Kettering in front of these two doctors, who, by the way, are pediatric doctors. I was in peds, not adult. In hindsight, that probably saved my life, because they were a little more aware that I wasn't 80 with CLL. And they said to me, we want to give you chemotherapy. Never heard that word before, maybe Deborah Winger in terms of endearment, but I was too young for that. And I said, hold your horses. When am I going to die? You kind of gave me a glib prognosis 6 months ago. And they said, like with this undying confidence, you have a 50% chance to live for the next 5 years. And I was like, well, that sucks. I'm 22. Just do the math. But Jay demanded to know in my just protection of who I was, what's in this chemotherapy? You mean there's more than one thing in chemotherapy? Yes, it's a cocktail of things that you don't want to drink at a bar. And in the 90s, you may know that just the platinums were out there. So platinum cover, platinum, all the things. 80% of this cocktail was vincristine, which many of you may know is almost as bad as adriamycin. Permanent nerve damage in your fingers and toes. Was that told to me or my parents? No. So I said to them, all right, fine. you give me this chemotherapy, and what does that 50% launch into? 80, 90%? And again, with absolute joy, 55%. 55%. That's 3 months of our 5 years. So my Uncle Jay, imagine being a 47-year-old man talking to his 22-year-old godson and saying, Matt, you would rather die in 5 years and have your hands in the hope you could rehab yourself than die in 70 years and not be able to play ever again. And that was my reality. How do you make that decision? How do you say no to chemotherapy? But I took my uncle's advice, got into that really boring beige office with my pediatric neuro-oncologist, pediatric radiation oncologist. And I said, I don't want your chemotherapy. And they're like, what? What's wrong with you? We're trying to save your life. And I said, what my uncle told me. I'd rather die in 5 years in the hopes that I might be able to play. That's all that matters to me now. My entire life was ruined. I had nothing left except the hope of regaining what cancer took away in my left hand. And they could not even understand the concept of a patient clapping back at them. What's more important to me is what's more important to you. So this is what it felt like to walk away. My last day at Sloan Kettering was May 27th, right before my 22nd birthday. And I'll breeze through the last couple of years because I'm very Googleable. Michelle will attest. I'm the first 13 pages on Google. Again, privileged to not live an ordinary life. My phone is talking. My phone thought I was talking to it. You can Google all this. I've been very lucky to meet all the right people at all the right moments and build some incredible things that I'm very proud of, and a massive network of extraordinary people at all levels of the government, the nonprofits, the patient advocate groups, the policy groups, the pharma companies, the biotech companies, the diagnostic companies. It's extraordinary. I take nothing for granted. But the one thing I want to leave you with in terms of impact, which is what the theme is going to be today, about connecting all of us. When I got involved in Livestrong, in its heyday, pre-Lance crash, that was my first experience realizing that I wasn't alone. It took 7 years to find someone like me. And talk about like me, his name was Craig, right? Ready for this? Bald, Jewish, New York City, brain cancer, went to my university and was in my a cappella group. That's the lotto right there, peer support. The charter in the early 2000s was that adolescent and young adult cancer wasn't pediatrics and it wasn't adult. It was different. Not better or worse, different needs, different protocols, different empathy, age appropriateness, psychosocial mandates, best practices did not exist for the 18 to 39 group. That was the NCI designated age range. How do we make young adult cancer improved for outcomes and quality of life? That was what sucked me into the Beltway, got me out of my funk, and gave me what I thought would be a new life. And this year, 20 years later, the oncologist published a peer-reviewed study that adolescent and young adult cancer quality of life, outcomes, and survival rates definitively improved. So all of our work was not in vain. It took 20 years, but that's what it takes. Thank you. Now, I say this with a grain of salt because you're never done. There's always another hill to climb. But along the way, I've met, as I said, so many extraordinary people. There's no way to pick your favorite kid. But if I had to, these people meant the most and had the most impact on me, and vice versa. So it's important to recognize that advocacy takes many shapes, many forms. It could be a desk job. It could be standing on stage. It could be running a marathon. It could be hosting a wine and cheese party. It could be just sharing your story. So everything that you're doing that might be considered behind the scenes is magic. And the beauty of what you do is when you do it right, no one knows. One of my dear friends was diagnosed with breast cancer on her 40th birthday. Why is that important? Because as part of the ACA in 2012, a group of people slipped in a little omnibus spending package that guaranteed two things. If you're diagnosed with breast cancer under 40, you're entitled to free reconstruction for the rest of your life, covered. And two, mammogram screenings had to go from 50 to 40, and the diagnostics companies had to catch up with the biology because younger breasts are more dense and require different tech. Again, under the radar. If my friend didn't get her mammogram, on her 40th birthday and was stage 1A, we don't know what would have happened if she waited to 50. When you do things right, no one's supposed to know. So welcome to healthcare in America. You know, I'd like to think in a magical world we share the same vision. Equity, parity, dignity, ethics for everyone, anywhere, no matter who you are. But the hill we can live on is like protecting people through legislation, talking to your congressmen, your senators, getting involved in advocacy and activism at the state and local level. Down ballots do more for healthcare protections than we know. Of course, the hill to pull up is bad marketing. I mocked up some pharma ads. Would you like to see them? All right, so let's go back to what Jerry said in the 90s. Why are there wheat fields in every commercial? What's with the wheat fields? There are bathtubs in pharma commercials. Why are there bathtubs in pharma commercials? And by the way, whoever says moderate to severe in parlance, that is not an expression of humanity. And yet you hear it every day, my mild to severe, this. I just think of this. I also worked in advertising for a couple of years too, so I got a sense of the back end of where these things come from. So this is a true story. This is not my other uncle, it's a third uncle, who was trying to get into his EMR on an app, but the app told you how to download the app. It was unnervingly ridiculous, and it wasn't built for someone in their early 70s. And this is rampant. Here's the patient conference with the patient panel with no patients on it. This has been going on for 20 years. This is the exception, so thank you for having me. I'll just let this sink in. And this is really, this is fact, not fiction. Remember 3-2-1 Contact on PBS? That's this. It's really happening. And this never happens, which is what I said before. No one asked to get really sick. I'm not talking break fix in primary care and simple things that could be, still annoying. I can't wait to get this and watch that webinar. So we have to take into consideration that healthcare is a supply-only economy. There's no demand to deal with formulary exemptions. I can't wait to itemize my hospital bill and see if they're a nonprofit organization. So I try to sum up in my own way my experience in advocacy, agency, policy, health to technology, and just patient experience into these kind of buckets. But the one thing missing, and you'll nod your heads, is empathy. It's not a new conversation. We've been talking about empathy in medicine for a long time. The Arnold P. Gold Foundation in the 1990s was the first organization that were like, where's empathy in medicine? So the question I have for stakeholders when I talk to them is, how do you insert empathy into your communications And one point to make here is that the word patient, I think, just has become an echo chamber of semantic. We're consumers. We buy things. But now we're in a market where we don't want to buy something, but someone else tells us how much it costs, which is the opposite of free market. One other thing that prevents empathy in communications to healthcare consumers are lawyers because of litigation, legislation, actionability. We want to protect what we say because, God forbid, we say the wrong thing and someone misinterprets it. So the sanitization of healthcare communications, while understandable, has been a huge barrier to actually connecting to people that aren't privileged, like I was, that their zip code determines how long they live, that they didn't finish high school, or they were born the wrong skin color. Highly unfortunate that this is what it's become. I made this chart, again, this is my opinion. Who can lead with empathy? What does that really mean? And I look at the way, when I ran Stupid Cancer, the messaging around most of the nonprofits is, we're sorry you're here, here's a hug. Welcome to the club, you never wanted to join, but your family, let's embrace. And that's what helped me. Livestrong was my, oh my God, I wish I had this. Where were you? And then Stupid Cancer became the next evolution of that. If only I knew you were there. But how do you eliminate the question of only I knew? I mentioned the happen to have. My dear friend Joe is a researcher. His mom had multiple myeloma. He went with his mom to the oncologist. And he knew that there was a genomic biomarker test for her cancer, and the doctor didn't believe him. He works in genetics and biomarker testing in esophageal diagnostics. And even though it was multiple myeloma, he knew. And the doctor was like affronted. You're telling me? But his mom happened to have Joe as a son, so he got a different doctor who listened, and she's doing fine right now. Trust can't be rushed. A banner ad with a bathtub is not going to convince somebody, oh, count me in. I'll sign up today. I'm going to wrap with a couple of stories. So, there are people at the end of these wires. Many of you might be those people, and yet you are the wires. You connect. That's your job. If you do it right, no one knows. Going back to this idea of consumers, giving them choices and options that aren't derivative of intent. You're not caked and baked in a system that you have to do this. They need to listen to you. You are the CEO of Save My Ass Incorporated, and you're hiring your doctor as your employee. My friend Kristen told me that a couple of years ago, and I was like, that's a great way to think about it. You are your own LLC. If you don't like it, get something new. If you don't like Doritos, eat Funyuns. It's your choice. That's consumption. What matters to the system should matter to the patient and vice versa, which is why this idea of patient centricity has kind of become hyperbole. What does it really mean to invite consumers into your business model? To really look at the path. How are these experiences manifested? What are the decisions they don't even know that they can make? There's a new diagnostic in esophageal cancer in my friend Joe's company. It detects pre-cancer, a phrase I've never heard of. Pre-cancer. You get a test during an endoscopy, if you have Barrett's or just GERD, and it knows to like 80% accuracy whether you're going to get pre-cancer. Not even cancer, pre-cancer. That's extraordinary. That's where we are today. There's tests like this in lung cancer, in pancreatic cancer. The idea that there are Americans suffering who are denied the awareness of these tests, forget market access, forget FDA approval, they're not made aware that there's a possibility they could just never get cancer. What a concept. We should be riding in the streets, forcing the FDA, forcing CMS, forcing the NCI. Why do we have to wait so long? Because consumers don't know there's a demand for these products. And going back to like the N of one, back in the 90s, everyone got the same thing. Everyone got this chemo and this radiation. Now there's 40 million little genetic things for the smallest types of branch trees of leukemia. How do you identify individuality? It's going to take consumers to pressure the system and fight back. This is self-explanatory. If you work with any of these agencies that make these ads, please tell them to stop with the bathtubs. Next time you watch any pharma commercial, in your head, jot down how inane this is, because it's inane. And we take it for granted watching these things where the butterfly and the little nest of the commercials, and how do these things actually help? Who writes these things? These don't speak person. This is the wrong way to spend money on reaching consumers. Which also goes back to empathy in medicine. I have many, many friends that are oncologists, chief surgeons, hematologists, neurologists. I grew up with them, went to college with them, high school with them, and they tell me all the time, they don't have time to practice empathy in their medicine. They're so chokeholded by this magical 7-minute number that keeps floating around. And then, of course, if they decide to practice Hippocrates, it takes longer, and there's a backlog, and patients don't get the help they need. These are massive conundrums that are overcomable. Is that a word? That we can overcome. But without understanding the root, this isn't about anything but consumer pressure on the system that the consumers don't know they can exert. And that's the hill I'm going to die on, is making sure that as many consumers shopping in that healthcare store they never asked to be in, where there's no greeter, you don't know what aisle you want, and if you find it, it's someone else's price. And you have to hope some other thing you pay for covers part of it so you don't go broke. So, again, stop with the wheat fields. It doesn't help anyone. So, under orders of Michelle, and everyone just has to follow her lead, she did mention at the top that we did a show together. I'm not going to tell you all to take your phones out. I think you're going to have access to this PDF. My show is called Out of Patience. It's a top 10 healthcare podcast. It's been a privilege to bring this to the market and share incredible stories. I have almost, my humble brag is 500,000 downloads and about 500 episodes. And being able to just be funny and dark humor and saying all the things that industry won't say or can't say because it's sanitized is so necessary to awaken the sleeping beast that are patients that are disenfranchised. So I stand here today somehow alive, 26 years later, with this ridiculous perspective on before the internet, first and foremost, getting on Google's health advisory board when there was barely an internet, and watching digital health and social media do all sorts of good and bad things. It's just been beyond extraordinary to live this unordinary life. Thank you.